as a parent, navigating the learning needs of your child is a daunting task. But what if your child struggles? Or what if they're diagnosed with a learning disability? Should you still homeschool? And if you did, what might that look like? Today, we're going to talk about homeschooling with dyslexia.
I was all alone, but then you came along.
Hi, I'm Erin Berry, author of Yes, You Can Homeschool, the Terrified Parent's Companion to Homeschool Success, and creator of the Yes, You Can Homeschool online equipping course. In short, I'm a 22-plus year homeschool veteran, keynote speaker, and educational consultant. And you can learn more about my background on my introductory video and at our website, thehomeeducatedmind.com. And if you find this video helpful, please share it and give it a thumbs up. And let's go right into what we're talking about today, which is basically homeschooling with dyslexia. We're going to first define dyslexia, then we're going to talk about should you homeschool with dyslexia? And then finally, we're going to discuss a different perspective about dyslexia. But let's jump right in. What is dyslexia? I'm going to be using, I'm going to read a definition and kind of describe it, but I just want you to know I'm getting my information mainly from two books, The Dyslexic Advantage and The Flickering Pixels. But anyway, so what is the definition of dyslexia? I'm going to read it first and then explain it. It's kind of long, so just bear with me. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. The difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of efficient classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Okay, that's long, isn't it? Now let's break that down. So to begin with, it is neurological in origin. So what this means is that the dyslexic brain organizes information and processes it in a different way than a non-dyslexic. There is actually a difference in sort of the way the lobes of their brain communicate. So I'm going to attempt to explain this in a very generalized and probably simplified way, so we can get a gist of this and continue with our conversation. But obviously it's, like I say, sort of simplified. But basically, the brain as we know it has two lobes, the left and the right brain, we call them. And when a person begins to read, everybody starts by using both sides, like approaching reading with both their left and right brain. But as time goes on, the non-dyslexic tends to move into the left brain processing side. Whereas the dyslexic, they don't make that transition and they continue to try to process through the right brain. And this is where the problem comes in, so to speak. Because the left side of the brain is where we have sequencing and word analysis and logic and abstract thinking and fine detailed processing. The right brain, on the other side, it synthesizes material and makes connections. Again, simplified, but you get the idea. So, if the dyslexic doesn't transition to using the left side of their brain, they're processing reading through the right side, and this causes problems. It makes it harder. And one of the things that's kind of interesting, though, is because they are processing through the right side and they're not reading as well, they tend to develop really strong listening skills because they're not getting information from the printed word. And so they have to listen, so auditorily they're getting their information. So they, as I say, become very strong listeners and memorizers, right? Because again, they have to take that in auditorily and then remember it. So you're going to see a strong memory there. And in their memory specifically, something that's interesting, there's two ways that we memorize. One is called episodic, and that means we remember through stories and information we've heard that's embedded in a narrative context. The other way we process or we memorize is semantic, and that is facts that are abstract, they're impersonal and devoid of context. Well, the dyslexic actually remembers better episodic, when it's embedded in a narrative context. Now, the good news with this brain difference is that it's not uncommon for a dyslexic to eventually catch up. And what's kind of exciting about that, and this is actually a quote from Pixels, the Pixels book, the interplay of these two processes cause them to think differently. So when a dyslexic matures, because they have predominantly been right-brained dependent, that's well developed. When they get older and they finally develop the left brain, the two work together. They think and process in a unique way that's actually very valuable. All right. Now, it says that they can have difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition, poor spellers, poor decoding ability. What does that mean? That means when they read, it's going to be very choppy. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. They're going to be bad spellers and have a hard time with word attack. And again, this is because of their weak left brain development. But something I read that I thought was interesting, this is from the Dyslexic Advantage, is that when we teach reading, and we're actually teaching something that is not innate. It's normal or innate for a person to learn to walk and talk, but reading is actually, we are forcing the brain to operate in a way that is not natural. So that kind of helps you with the dyslexic. They're showing that difficulty more, just because, like I say, it's not innate. Anyway, okay. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, phonics. So the word parts, sounding out words, the rules for language, these things are very difficult for the dyslexic. And if you think about it, our alphabet is very linear. Yeah, that's it. It's very linear. It's sequential, abstract. Again, left brain skills. So when you have phonological processing, there's two things that come into play: splitting words into sounds and discriminating between sounds. So this is hard for dyslexics, so that's why reading and spelling is difficult. And FYI, they'll have a difficulty learning a second language too, just because of that discrimination. And if you think about it, phonological processing is really the most basic function for the entire language structure, and it supports higher level language functions. And some of those higher level language functions are things like executive function, which is organization, planning, as well as keeping things in your mind. And so the dyslexic struggles with that, so they're going to have a harder time keeping things in their mind and with organization. And what's interesting is it's often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. What does this mean? Well, most dyslexics appear very intelligent. They don't appear like they have any less intelligence, so why are they struggling? Also, it's not because they're not getting instruction. They're getting the same instruction, but they're just not having the same results. And then finally, a secondary consequence may include problems in reading comprehension, reduced experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. What does this mean? Because they're struggling so to read, they're not having the comprehension. Because they aren't having that comprehension, they're not gaining the knowledge, the background knowledge when they go into further study or just even getting from that reading experience. And their vocabulary is weakened because, again, they're having a hard time with the decoding. All right. So that is the general gist of somebody with dyslexia. So the question is, should we homeschool a child like this? Homeschooling with dyslexia. Can we? Should we? And if we do, what would it look like? My short answer is yes, homeschooling is a great environment for teaching a student that has dyslexia. And I'm going to share a number of reasons of why it's so good. The first one is procedural learning. When you learn something, you have to learn how to do it. And you go through it till it becomes automatic. Now, for a dyslexic, this is difficult. And so they struggle with the rules, complex rules and procedures. And you know what? A lot of our basic academic skills heavily rely on rules and procedures. And so for them, that's going to be difficult. But as a homeschooler, if you know that they need this procedural learning, but it's a struggle, you can take the time needed to go slower, so they have plenty of time to learn it, and you can break it down into small pieces. And that's actually what they need. They need it broken down even more so they can practice those pieces and build. And so as a homeschooling parent, by understanding this, then you're not so panicked if you have to take a longer time to practice. The other thing is they do tend with this very thing, the procedural learning, sometimes they appear like they've mastered something and then you're away from it for a few weeks and they've totally lost it. Well, that is typical with a dyslexic, so you would know that. Maybe you would take less breaks. Maybe you would recognize, hey, I'm just going to have to review again to get them back up to speed. Another reason why homeschooling is good is that as a parent, when you are expecting these difficulties, it keeps you from getting angry and frustrated. And sometimes when we see if our children forget something or don't do something well, we can be tempted to think they're not working hard. But the truth is, and I appreciated this was from the Dyslexic Advantage, that they said dyslexic children are working much harder than everybody else. So that's helpful to know too. They're actually working harder to overcome some of these processing differences. And so that can help you to be less frustrated and more patient. There are specific strategies and curriculum for dyslexia now. So one of the most known strategies or ideas is the Orton-Gillingham reading approach. And these are 4 of the many choices of homeschool curriculum, but just so you know, there's All About Reading, Logic of English, Barton Reading and Spelling, and Reading Horizons. So those are some choices. Then in the math curriculum, Math UC and Right Start Math are well suited for dyslexic students. So it's kind of neat. Another reason why homeschooling is great is that you can choose curriculums that work specifically for their learning needs. Another advantage to homeschooling a student with dyslexia is you're not bound by the time frame or schedule of a public school system, and you don't have the pressure of standardized tests. And that can be hard on a student because they know they're struggling, and they can see that comparison if they're in against other students. But this way, homeschooling, they don't have that pressure. One-on-one instruction is always the best. You can see if your child is engaged, you can see when they're running into a problem, and you can correct one-on-one, take the time they need, adjust for them. And finally, you can help them understand. You know, they have to work harder. Things are slower for them. But these areas of weakness also mirror strengths. And so they can know that this is just one piece of who they are. You know, personally, I know I'm dyslexic. I went to school a long time ago, and back in the day, they didn't know a lot about dyslexia. I was never diagnosed. But as an adult, I've taken tests. I totally fit the profile. And as I worked with more and more students, I'm sure that I am dyslexic. But you know, one of the hardest things for me growing up, aside from every one of the things that they're saying, as I'm reading the characteristics, I'm just tempted to go, oh yeah, that explains that. But anyway, as I'm reading it, I'm remembering all of these struggles. And the hardest thing for me was that I knew I wasn't keeping up. I saw the other students reading and learning. I didn't understand why they knew things. How did they know those things? What was I missing? And I spent seriously too many years feeling stupid, inadequate, and lesser than. And so what I think is really important is if you have a dyslexic student, to let them know they're not those things. They're not stupid, right? Their intelligence is the same. It's a different brain wiring, and it's for a reason. And today, I know that. But we want our students, we want them to know that. Sure, you struggle reading, but that's not all of who you are. And ultimately, I believe God had a purpose in that wiring. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Our final word on dyslexia, we want to discuss a different perspective. Is it a learning disability or is it a learning difference? I personally think it's a learning difference. I believe that God actually created the dyslexic brain because he has a need for the way that they process and the value that they contribute. And I'm going to share why I believe this using kind of a funny analogy. But if you look at the number of people, this is kind of out there, if you look at the number of people with their different eye colors, I want you to think with me for a second. They say 79% of the population has brown eyes, okay? 8 to 10% have blue, 5% have hazel, and 2% have green. That's like, I mean, you know, if you read different sites, but that's the basics. That's the basic percentages. All right. Do you know how many people they believe are dyslexic? It is between 15 to 20% of the population. I've even seen higher percentages, but let's just go with that. Do you know what that means? That means there are 4 times as many dyslexics as people with blue eyes. There are 10 times as many with, oops, no, I'm wrong. Okay. There are, am I right? Oh dear. There are 2 times. Okay, so, you know, this affects your ability to know anything, this dyslexia. It's my new excuse. Okay, so 2 times as many people with blue eyes have dyslexia. 4 times as many as people with hazel eyes, and 10 times as many as people with green eyes. And actually, there are, 17% of the population, they say, have these different eye colors, blue, hazel, and green. So that means that's about equal to the number of people that have dyslexia. That's a lot of people. To me, that cannot just be a learning disability. That's a huge percentage of the population. I am sure that God created the dyslexic brain, like I said, for a reason. And if you have a child who's dyslexic, God has created them for purpose, as he has everybody, but he's created their brain too. And so sure, it's going to mean that when you are homeschooling them, that it is a struggle to read. It's a struggle to learn. It's going to be a struggle for a long time. But I want you to keep in perspective that dyslexic brains are intended to work different ways to excel at different tasks. And as you're going through this struggle, you keep your eye on God's purpose and where they're going to be. Because I want to tell you a few of the advantages of the dyslexic brain. They spot the larger context behind a given situation or idea. They have the multidimensional perspective, the ability to see new, unusual, or distinct connections. They have inferential reasoning and ambiguity detection, the ability to recombine things in a novel way and a general inventiveness, a greater mindfulness and intentionality during tasks that others take for granted. That's just a little bit. I got that from the dyslexic advantage. But that's just a small piece. But they have these other skills. And do you know, millions of individuals with dyslexia are good at what they do, and not in spite of their dyslexia processing difference, but because of it. So be encouraged. The strengths that your dyslexic child has, or the weaknesses, are the other side of the coin of their strengths. And homeschooling is a great way to help them get through those difficulties till they can get to the place where they get their brain fully functioning and they then can use it the way God intended. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Join us at thehomeeducatedmind.com. Most importantly, let us know what you liked about this video. Share it, and if you would like, subscribe so that you can be notified when we make new content. And until then, remember, yes, you can homeschool, even with a dyslexic student.